Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're getting into something really powerful. Barbara Mujica's collection of short stories called Imagining Iraq. We're not just going to look at the stories themselves, but at the incredibly personal, profound reason they even exist.
And that one sentence, it's the key to this entire thing. This is where it all begins. Not on a battlefield, but in the dark. In the sleepless nights of a mother who was terrified and whose imagination was running wild.
You see, the author, Barbara Mujica, is a professor, a writer, but during the Iraq War, her main identity was mother of a Marine. So for her, the war wasn't something she saw in the news. No, it was this constant, obsessive, day in and day out, imagining of every possible horror her son could be facing. Now you'd think, right, that once her son came home safe and sound, the imagining would stop, that she could finally breathe. But it didn't. The war had kind of set up camp in her mind, and she just couldn't pack it up and move on. She says her nights were still filled with the sound of IEDs going off, just inches away in her mind. And that constant anxiety, that ghost of the war, that's what drove her to write this book. It was this deep need to understand the world her son had been a part of. So how does this private maternal fear, turn into a public collection of stories? Well, it all started because she felt so incredibly grateful that her son was back, and she just knew she had to give back somehow. So she started working as a faculty advisor for the student veterans at Georgetown University, and that's where something amazing happened. These young vets, who were often pretty buttoned up with their own families, started talking to her. They started sharing things that were just too raw, too messy to ever tell their own parents. And this just kept happening over and over. She'd hear some awful or morally complicated story and say, "Wow, my son never mentioned anything like that." And the vet would just say, "Oh, I would never tell my mom this." And that's when she realized it. There's this entire category of war stories that are for anyone but a mother. But here's the thing. These weren't your typical action movie war stories. They were about the stuff you don't see. They explored these deep, invisible psychological wounds and ethical burdens that soldiers carry around long after they've come home.
Let me tell you about one story from the book that just perfectly captures this. It's about a Marine, his squad, and a sheep-herding dog they named Raj.
Okay, so the story goes like this. A Marine unit takes over a family's house, and the family begs them to look after their dog Raj. And they promise. But there's this one soldier, Jake, who's just full of this casual cruelty. And for no reason at all, he just shoots and kills the dog. And the other Marines are just horrified. They're enraged by how pointless it all was.
And that's the gut punch, right there. The narrator realizes that the dog's death, it wasn't just about a dog. That one senseless act became a symbol for everything. For the lost friends, for the grieving families, for all the innocent life just erased. For him, Raj was the whole war. But it wasn't just about the senselessness of it all. The book also dives deep into these incredibly complex, totally unexpected human relationships that can form when you're in a situation like that, where trust can save your life one day and get you killed the next. And you get these two portraits of trust that could not be more different. In one, you have this Marine officer, Ignacio, who builds a real friendship with an Iraqi craftsman named Jamali. It's built on respect, and it leads to Ignacio literally risking his life to save Jamali's son. Then you have the other story. An American interrogator thinks he's connecting with a female detainee, Kala. He thinks she's falling for him, but she's just playing him, using that trust to lead his entire unit into a fatal ambush. It just shows you how human connection out there is a total gamble.
So where does all this imagining lead? Well, for the author, this whole journey of listening and writing, it doesn't really have a neat, tidy ending. It's not the kind of thing that just heals over and disappears. This quote just says it all. Her son, Mauro, he eventually moved on. He built his life. But for her, because she wrote these stories, the ones he couldn't tell her and the ones other soldiers shared with her, she's still there. She's forever connected to that world she had to imagine. And in the end, that's what this book is. It's a place for these stories that had nowhere else to go. It's not trying to be a perfect factual history. It's an attempt to feel and to understand something that for those of us who weren't there might just be fundamentally impossible to truly grasp. Which leaves us with this final, really challenging thought. This book exists precisely because some experiences are too brutal, too complicated to share with the people you love the most.
So if these are the stories soldiers can't tell, maybe the closest the rest of us can ever get to understanding is through this difficult, messy, but totally necessary act of imagining.